Imagine being able to play piano, not professionally, but well enough that you could sit down and play Chopin's Nocturne in E flat from memory, eyes closed, fingers finding the keys like old friends finding each other in a crowd. Life happens. You stop playing and practicing. Next thing you know, you haven't played in 12 years. So you sit down at a piano for the first time in over a decade. Your fingers go to the keys, and nothing. Not rusty, not a bit off. Nothing. The muscle memory is gone. The neural pathways that once produced that piece have been, and this is the precise neuroscience term, cannibalized, eaten alive, reassigned, colonized by whatever you had been doing with your hands for 12 years. Typing, swiping, scrolling, clicking. The brain territory that once belonged to Chopin now belonged to spreadsheets. You didn't just forget how to play. Your brain recycled the hardware. And that's not a metaphor. That's competitive plasticity, one of the most unsettling and least discussed principles in neuroscience. Your brain has a fixed amount of cortical real estate. When you stop using a skill, the brain doesn't politely archive it. It reassigns the territory to whatever you are practicing. The cortical space map that represented your neglected abilities is actively consumed, devoured, by the neural representations of your dominant activities. If all you do is one thing, one type of work, one cognitive mode, one daily routine, your brain becomes extraordinarily efficient at that one thing and catastrophically impoverished at everything else. Today, we're teaching you the practice that stops the cannibalization, the Renaissance practice, 30 minutes of daily, deliberate, novel learning outside your expertise, not for career advancement, not for productivity, for neural survival. I am Sarah. This is Ritual Friday on the Wired Ape. Today's practice is different from every other Ritual Friday because the threat it addresses is invisible. You can't feel your cortical maps shrinking. There's no pain signal when the brain territory that once held your drawing ability gets reassigned to email processing. The cannibalization is silent, gradual, and only noticed when you try to access a skill that has already been consumed. Here's the Wired Ape framework. For 300,000 years, human survival required multi-competence. Every individual needed to track animals, identify plants, navigate terrain, make tools, read weather, tell stories, perform rituals, and maintain social bonds. The brain evolved for breadth, for maintaining diverse skill maps across a wide cognitive landscape. The enriched environments our ancestors inhabited, sensorially rich, psychically demanding, cognitively varied, kept neurogenesis humming and cortical maps diverse. Modern life does the opposite. Specialization narrows the cognitive landscape to a single corridor. Office workers spend 8 hours in one cognitive mode. Athletes train one movement pattern. Academics study one discipline. And the brain, following the ruthless logic of competitive plasticity, cannibalizes everything outside that corridor. The Renaissance practice is the antidote. 30 minutes daily of something outside of your expertise, drawing if you're a writer, music if you're an athlete, language if you're a mathematician, to maintain the cognitive breadth your brain was designed for. The Renaissance practice draws from 3 cultural lineages that independently recognize the same truth. Human flourishing requires breadth, not just depth. In ancient Athens, paideia, the ideal of education, was not vocational training. It was the cultivation of a complete human being. A citizen of the polis was expected to be competent in athletics, music, rhetoric, mathematics, philosophy, and civic participation. Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum didn't produce specialists. They produced polymath citizens who could think across domains. The Greek understanding was that excellence in one domain without competence in others produced a benausis, a person narrowed by their craft, lacking the breadth of vision needed for wise governance and full human flourishing. Specialization was for slaves and craftspeople. Breadth was for citizens. While we can critique the class dynamics of that framework, the neurological insight underneath is sound. Cognitive diversity is cognitive health. In Japanese culture, ikigai, roughly translated as reason for being, or that which makes life worth living, is intimately connected to continuous learning and skill development across lifespans. The Japanese concept of kaizen applies not just to manufacturing, but to personal development. The expectation is that a person will continuously acquire new skills, explore new domains, and refine existing abilities throughout life, not just during formal education. The Japanese tradition of sensei culture recognizes that mastery in one domain deepens through engagement with others. A master calligrapher studies ikebana. A martial artist practices shoto. The cross-pollination isn't a hobby. It's understood as essential to deepening primary mastery because different domains exercise different neural pathways and produce insights that transfer across boundaries. Aboriginal Australian cultures, representing the longest continuous cultural traditions on Earth, spanning at least 65,000 years, practiced and continue to practice a model of education in which every individual learns multiple environmental competencies. Navigation across vast landscapes using songlines, identification of hundreds of plant and animal species, water finding techniques across arid terrain, fire management, tool making, storytelling and ceremonial knowledge, tracking, star reading. This wasn't specialization with a few side skills. It was systematic multi-competence. The expectation that a fully initiated adult would be capable across a wide range of environmental, social, and spiritual domains. From a neuroscience perspective, this represents the ultimate enriched environment. Constant exposure to diverse sensory inputs, novel problem-solving demands, and cross-domain skill development, exactly the conditions that research shows maximize hippocampal neurogenesis and cortical map diversity. Aboriginal knowledge structures are living cultural practices with specific custodianship, transmission protocols, and spiritual significance. The Wired Ape references the structural principle of multi-competence training, the value of broad skill development for brain health, without extracting or decontextualizing specific Aboriginal practices. We encourage listeners to learn about Aboriginal knowledge systems through relationship with Aboriginal communities and resources. Let's go into the neuroscience of why your brain cannibalizes neglected skills and how novel learning stops it. Michael Merzenich, the neuroscientist often called the father of neuroplasticity, recipient of the 2016 Kavli Prize, conducted the foundational experiments that revealed competitive plasticity in the 1980s. In the classic experiment, Merzenich and John Kass mapped to the somatosensory cortex of owl monkeys, the brain region that processes this touch from different body parts. Each finger had its own dedicated cortical territory. Then they amputated the monkey's middle finger and remapped the cortex several weeks later. The cortical territory that had belonged to the amputated finger had not gone silent. It had been invaded, taken over by the representations of the adjacent fingers. The index finger and ring finger maps had expanded into the vacated territory. The brain didn't just forget digit 3, it recycled the real estate. The reverse experiment was equally revealing. When monkeys were trained to use one finger intensively, tapping a rotating disc for extended periods, the cortical territory for that finger expanded, consuming space from neighboring, less used finger representations. More practice meant more cortical territory. Less practice meant less territory, actively consumed by whatever was practiced more. This is competitive plasticity. The brain's cortical map space is a zero-sum game. Every skill that gains territory takes it from a skill that loses it. If you spend 10 hours a day typing and 0 hours playing music, the cortical maps that once supported musical ability are progressively colonized by typing representations. The music doesn't fade. It gets eaten. The same principle was demonstrated in humans. Studies comparing violinists to non-violinists found that the somatosensory cortex devoted the left hand, the fingering hand, was dramatically enlarged in violinists, and the enlargement correlated with the age at which they started playing. London taxi drivers, studied by Eleanor Maguire of University College London, showed enlarged posterior hippocampi, the region responsible for spatial navigation, but their anterior hippocampi were smaller than those of bus drivers who followed fixed routes. Specialization didn't just grow one region, it shrank another. The brain gave spatial expertise and took something else. The antidote to competitive plasticity is environmental enrichment, exposure to novel, complex, sensorially diverse stimulation. The foundational enriched environment research, pioneered by Marion Diamond at UC Berkeley in 1964, showed that rats raised in complex, stimulating environments had measurably thicker cerebral cortices than rats raised in impoverished conditions. Since then, hundreds of studies have confirmed the principle. Specifically relevant to the Renaissance practice, enriched environment housing increases hippocampal neurogenesis. A landmark study by Kemperman, Kuhn, and Gage found that 15% more granule neurons in the dentate gyrus, the hippocampal region where new neurons are born, of mice living in enriched environment compared to standard housing. In older mice, aged 10 to 20 months, enriched environmental exposure produced a 5-fold increase in hippocampal neurogenesis, demonstrating that the brain's capacity to grow new neurons persists into advanced age and responds powerfully to environmental stimulation. Exercise doubles new neuron production. Voluntary running dramatically increases the proliferation of neural precursor cells in the hippocampal dentate gyrus, as shown by Van Praag and colleagues at the Salk Institute. But here's the critical finding. Learning determines whether those new neurons survive. Exercise creates new neurons. Enriched environments, novel cognitive challenges, new skill acquisition, diverse sensory input promote the survival of those new neurons by integrating them into functional circuits. Without learning to integrate them, the new neurons produced by exercise die. A study by Fable and colleagues showed that the effects of running and enrichment are additive. Combining physical exercise with cognitive novelty produced approximately 30% more surviving new neurons than either stimulus alone. The mechanism, elucidated by Gonskapesky and colleagues in the Journal of Neuroscience 2021, involves fibroblast growth factor receptors that are activated by enriched environments, signaling neural stem cells to proliferate and differentiate into mature neurons. The most actionable insight from this research: exercise primes the brain for neurogenesis by creating new neural precursor cells. Novel learning preserves those cells by giving them a functional purpose. Without the learning, the cells die. Without the exercise, there are fewer cells to preserve. This is why the Renaissance practice combines both. Ideally, the novel learning activity involves some physical component. Drawing engages fine motor control, music engages sensory motor coordination, language engages articulatory motor systems, dance engages full body coordination, and takes place after or alongside regular physical exercise. Your daily jog creates the neurons. Your 30 minutes of guitar, of watercolor, or mandarin, or pottery, or dance keeps them alive. Cultural traditions and the neuroscience describe the same phenomenon. Greek paideia understood that a citizen narrowed to one competence was a diminished human being. Neuroscience confirms narrowed to one cortical map pattern is a diminished brain, literally, with measurably less hippocampal volume and less cortical diversity than a brain maintained in enriched condition. Japanese Ikigai and Kaizen understood that lifelong learning across domains produces vitality and purpose. Neuroscience confirms novel cognitive challenges across the lifespan sustain hippocampal neurogenesis, maintaining memory, learning capacity, and cognitive flexibility into the 10th decade of life. Aboriginal multi-competence training produced individuals capable of navigating the most demanding environments on Earth for 5,000 years. Neuroscience confirms the multi-domain skill development this requires represents the ultimate enriched environment, constant novel input, diverse motor patterns, cross-modal cognitive demands that maximizes the brain's capacity for plasticity and resilience. The Renaissance practice doesn't ask you to become a polymath. It asks you to give your brain 30 minutes a day of something different. The minimum dose of cognitive novelty that research suggests is sufficient to maintain cortical diversity and sustain neurogenesis in the face of modern specialization's relentless narrowing. Here is your complete Renaissance practice protocol. Choose one activity that is outside your primary expertise. The key criterion: it should engage cognitive and/or motor systems that your daily work does not engage. If you work with language, writing, editing, teaching, law, choose a spatial or motor activity: drawing, sculpting, woodworking, a physical sport, dance, or a musical instrument. If you work with numbers, finance, engineering, data science, accounting, choose a linguistic or artistic activity, creative writing, poetry, a foreign language, painting, or singing. If you work with your body, athletics, construction, physical therapy, choose a cognitive or fine motor activity, learning a language, chess, calligraphy, coding, or a musical instrument. If you work with technology, programming, design, IT, choose a tactile or embodied activity, pottery, gardening, cooking from scratch, martial arts, or hand lettering. The principle, cross-domain transfer. The activity should activate neural networks that your daily work leaves dormant. This is what prevents those dormant networks from being cannibalized by your dominance activity. The weekly structure. Daily, choose for 30 minutes of your daily 30 minutes of your chosen novel activity. Set a timer. Treat it like an appointment with your hippocampus. Morning is ideal. Neurogenesis research suggests that BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports neuron survival and growth levels, are highest after morning exercise and novel stimulation. Some people benefit from rotating between 2 or 3 novel activities across the week. For example, drawing on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and guitar on Tuesday, Thursday. The rotation adds an additional layer of novelty that further stimulates the neurogenic pathways. However, sufficient consistency within each activity is needed to produce the learning signal that preserves new neurons. A good balance. Maintain one activity for at least 4 weeks before adding or rotating. If the idea of starting a completely new skill feels intimidating, start with what I call the terrible 30. 30 minutes of being terrible at something on purpose. Day 1. Buy a cheap sketch pad and a pencil. Set a timer for 30 minutes. Draw your hand. It'll be awful. But that's the point. The awfulness is the learning signal. The gap between your intention and your execution is where neurogenesis happens. It's the prediction error that tells the brain, this situation requires new neural resources. Day 2. Draw your hand again. It will be slightly less awful. The brain is already reassigning resources. Day 30. Your hand drawing is still not gallery worthy, but your visual spatial processing has measurably improved, your fine motor control has sharpened, and most importantly, the cortical territory that was being consumed by your dominance activity has been reclaimed by a new skill map. You don't need to be good. You need to be learning. The brain doesn't care about the quality of the output. It cares about the prediction error, the gap between expectation and result that triggers plasticity. For maximum effect, pair the Renaissance practice with physical exercise. Morning, 20 to 30 minutes of aerobic exercise, running, cycling, swimming, brisk walking. This primes neurogenesis, creating new neural precursor cells in the dentate gyrus. Immediately after or within 2 hours, 30 minutes of novel learning. This preserves the new neurons by integrating them into functional circuits. This neurogenesis stack, exercise to create, learning to preserve, is the most evidence-based protocol for maintaining hippocampal volume and cognitive diversity across the lifespan. Keep a simple Renaissance practice journal. Date, activity, duration, 1 sentence on what you learned or noticed. That's it. Don't grade yourself. Don't track improvement curves. The journal serves one purpose: accountability. If you can see a streak of daily entries, you'll maintain the practice. If you see gaps, you'll notice the cannibalization creeping back. The Renaissance practice is safe for virtually everyone. If you choose a physical novel activity, martial arts, dances, climbing, apply standard physical safety precautions. If you have a neurological condition affecting learning or motor function, consult your healthcare provider about appropriate activities. Mistake 1. Choosing something too similar to your existing work. A programmer learning a new programming language is not a Renaissance practice. It's the same cognitive mode with a different syntax. The whole point is cross-domain, activating neural networks that your dominant work leaves dormant. Mistake 2. Trying to be good immediately. The Renaissance practice is not about producing output. It is about producing prediction error. If you're not confused, frustrated, and slightly terrible, you're not generating the learning signal that drives neuroplasticity. Embrace the incompetence. That's where the neurons grow. Mistake 3. Doing it passively. Watching a YouTube tutorial about guitar is not Renaissance practice. Playing guitar badly for 30 minutes is. The learning signal requires active engagement, motor output, cognitive effort, attentional focus. Passive consumption doesn't trigger plasticity. Mistake 4. Skipping when you're busy. This is the most common failure point. The Renaissance practice feels expendable precisely because it has no immediate professional payoff. But the neuroscience is clear. The cost of skipping it is invisible cortical cannibalization. You won't feel the loss until years later when you try to access a cognitive capacity that's been consumed by your dominant activity. The daily 30 minutes isn't a luxury. It's neural maintenance. Mistake 5. Treating it as a performance obligation. The Renaissance practice should feel like play, exploratory, open-ended, judgment-free. If it starts feeling like another item on your productivity checklist, you've lost the spirit. The enriched environment research shows that voluntary engagement produces stronger neurogenic effects than forced engagement. Do it because it's fascinating, not because it's required. Mistake 6. Abandoning an activity before the learning curve flattens. The first 2 weeks of any new skill are the steepest learning curve, and therefore the richest period for neuroplasticity. But the brain needs 4 to 6 weeks to consolidate new neural pathways. If you switch activities every week, you never get to consolidation. Stick with your chosen activity for at least a month before evaluating whether to continue or rotate. Here's your challenge. This weekend, spend 30 minutes doing something you've never done before, or something you haven't done in years. Draw, sing, dance in your kitchen, write a poem, play an instrument, learn 10 words in a language you don't speak, cook something you've never attempted, build something with your hands. The only rule, it must be outside your professional expertise, and you must be bad at it. And track this. After the 30 minutes, write one sentence. Today, I was terrible at the activity, and my brain is better for it. Share your sentence, and if you're brave, a photo of your terrible drawing or your fumbled chord progression on Telegram. Let's celebrate incompetence as the neuroplastic treasure it actually is. The Renaissance practice occupies a foundational position in the Wired Ape toolkit because it addresses a threat that compounds over time. Every other practice in our toolkit, breathwork, writing, cold exposure, communal ritual, produces immediate benefits. The Renaissance practice produces long-term structural protection against the slow, invisible erosion of cognitive breadth that modern specialization causes. For Sivester listeners, cognitive diversity is directly linked to investment decision quality. Investors with broader knowledge bases, who read across disciplines, engage with art and science and philosophy outside their financial domain, make fewer cognitive error, fall into fewer confirmation biases, and produce better long-term returns. The Renaissance practice is portfolio diversification for your brain. For Management Messiah readers, the most innovative leaders in business history have been cross-domain thinkers. Steve Jobs studied calligraphy. Einstein played violin. Ada Lovelace bridged mathematics and imagination. The Renaissance practice isn't a deviation from professional excellence. It's a substrate on which professional excellence grows. When Ritual OS launches in August 2026, the Renaissance practice will be available as a structured daily protocol with activity suggestions based on your primary profession, a streak tracker, and a community gallery where practitioners share their terrible 30 outputs with pride. 3 points. 1. Your brain is a zero-sum cortical real estate market. Every skill you neglect loses territories to the skills you practice. This isn't forgetting, it's competitive plasticity, the active reassignment of neural territory from unused to used capabilities. 2. Novel learning, especially combined with physical exercise, sustains hippocampal neurogenesis, preserves new neurons, and maintains the cognitive breadth that modern specialization erodes. Enriched environments produce 15% more hippocampal neurons, 5-fold increases in older adults, immeasurably better learning and memory. 3. 30 minutes a day of something outside your expertise. That's the dose. The activity doesn't matter. The novelty matters. The prediction error matters. The being terrible at something new matters. Because that's where your brain grows. Your ancestors were trackers, builders, storytellers, navigators, artists, healers, and hunters, all in one lifetime. Your brain was built for that breath. Don't let a spreadsheet eat your Chopin. Follow at the Wired Ape on Instagram and X. Join the watering hole on Telegram. Come back Monday for the next Mismatch Monday. Be kind to your Wired Ape brain and feed it something new today.